I feel like I often come into this state where I get angry and I know that I need to, punch a pillow to get under to the grief. And
Yep.
I feel like physically unable to feel almost. It's like
Yep.
I'm in my mind that I tell myself, feel. And, I really, it's almost physical, like I'm up here and and I feel the moments where I get to grief, I don't feel afraid in that moment. Like I know it can almost be nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But
So
I seem so unable to get there.
Yeah, let's look at that. Because it's important to understand the general psychology of most of us in the way that we handle emotions, right? And this is a very common thing worldwide, so we just need to look at the general reasons why we revert to anger. Why is anger present? So the very first feeling you described was, I need to feel my anger, I feel I need to feel my anger.
Is the first feeling, though, numb? Are you saying numb? When you go to even feel anger, you feel like I can't? Is that what you were saying? Or are you saying it's anger?
I guess it's both. It sometimes starts as anger and then...
Yep.
Well, numb is above anger, so let's look at this. So we go either numb or we start getting angry. Why do we get angry? Because those things...
Addictions.
...are not getting met. Right? So there's addictions. So what most of us do is we work in harmony with our addictions, and when our addictions are satisfied, we're very happy, very content. We don't get angry ever. It's like every time you want a coffee, you get one, you're happy. But when you want a coffee and you can't get a good one, how do you feel then? Not very happy. Like, this is crap. We get unhappy whenever our addiction's not met. So anger is a method that we use to tell the world and ourselves that we're not happy with our addictions, getting not satisfied. So if you keep reverting to anger and then say, I want to try to get to my sadness, you're nowhere near your sadness. What you're nearer to is your addictions. You need to feel some of them. You follow?
Yeah.
Why am I angry? It's because I want power in this moment. So anger is like a power construct. So it's all about power. To get back my addictions, to get my addictions met again.
Yeah.
That's why I get angry. So numb is just going, I'm sick and tired of my addictions not getting met, so I'm just going to give up. You follow?
Yeah.
Complete apathy.
Yeah.
Right? So that's even above the anger. That's, rage. And instead of expressing rage as rage, we're expressing it as I'm just going to go like floppy now. You see it in a child a lot when a child is restricted. I don't know if you've ever tried restricting a child. When a child's in a state of rage and you restrict the child, it will either go down into its addiction and down further into its fear and sadness, or it will go up into numb. And when it goes up into numb, what it does, it just goes, just flops on the ground. You know what I mean? And you can't lift it up and you can't pull it. And the purpose of it is rage, but not being expressed as rage, being expressed as, like, I'm not going to do anything anybody wants, but I'm also giving up on myself and my desires and my addictions as well. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So when our addictions are getting satisfied, we're really involved in meeting them. And initially when they are not met, we get angry. But when they're not met many, many, many times in a row, then we start going numb. You follow? So you need to understand the psychology of why we go numb and then why we get angry. All right. So now I know that, the question becomes, what's under my addictions?
AJ, could I just
Can we use a mic? Yep.
When you don't get your addiction met enough times, you start getting numb.
Yeah.
When you're a child.
Yeah, well, you see, as a child, there's two potential responses you'll take as a child. One response is you do the angry thing and mum and dad respond to it. So, most parents are like, my child's there flopping on the floor in the middle of the supermarket, what do I do? And so what they do is they go, oh, the child wanted a lolly, I'm going to just give him a lolly. Be done with it. Now, the child in that process learns anger gives me results. Anger gets me back into my addictions. It gets me what I want, right? Anger is a tool to do. So they learn that. But let's say the parent doesn't do that. And let's say the parent decides, no, I'm just not going to give them anything, right? Or even worse, let's say the parent decides that they're going to punish the child every time they do it. So let's say they smack them. So violence towards the child every time they do it. What will happen is the child will give up on its addiction and go numb, right, as a way to handle the situation. They still aren't dealing with any of their fears or, not allowed to feel any of those generally, and so they don't deal with them, and so they stay in that state, right? So usually when we respond with addictions, we're responding either in anger or going numb, and for all of our addictions, there are some that you'll have a tendency to go numb straight away, and there's some that you'll have a tendency to just get angry all the time, right? And numb is also like apathy, like numb. Stoic is also numb. Stoic, rigid, I'm not feeling anything, numb. And these kind of things are expressions of rage, which are what are called self-referred. In other words, I put upon myself rather than upon the world.
And at the same time, the addictions themselves were already trying to help the kid from avoiding the causal feelings.
That's right. The reason why the child is already in the addiction is because underneath the addiction are the fears, and as a child, they are your parents' fears. So that's why it's complicated as a child, because you're often feeling your parents' fears, responding to your parents' fears, responding to their inability to be sad, responding to their shame, responding to their guilt, responding to these other things. But then on top of that, you're not allowed to. Because every time you do as a child, the parents get a reminder of themselves. It's a reminder to the parent that those feelings are in them, and so they don't want that, so they try and stop you, right? And they use all techniques, most of which are seemingly benign. So give them a bit of food, give them a bit of this, give them a bit of that.
Look at the birdie.
Bit of telly,
Yeah.
look at the bird outside.
Yeah.
Like all sorts of things, distraction. There's all sorts of methods that parents use towards children while they're growing to distract them and get them away from their feelings, right? And we as parents have become adept at that because we became adept at it as children ourselves. Right? So we become adept at this process of avoidance. So you could also say that there are other things, aren't there, like distraction?
Which is sort of like an addiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we continually engage. Yeah.
So they're all related to addictions, yeah? And if you understand that, you can go, right, inside of me are feelings. Inside those feelings are, I want my addictions met because my addictions cause me to cover over all of the things I don't want to feel. So what are the things you're afraid of feeling? See, if you're not afraid of feeling them, then you won't use an addiction. Can we turn off, please? Does that make sense? So here I am, I'm in my fears, and these are all the things that I don't want to feel. And all the things I feel I can feel, I'm not going to have many addictions about. Now, an example of that is most of us, when you're happy, you're happy. And you're happy to feel happy. You don't want to stop yourself from feeling happy. And in fact, many of us are quite addicted to being happy, and so we use all sorts of techniques to stay happy. But when it comes to sad, you're not happy about feeling sad because you're sad, right? And you have all sorts of ways of avoiding sad. And those ways you use every single time. And if one of them doesn't work, like your addictions don't work, then let's revert to some rage. That might work. And if that doesn't work, let's go floppy and numb and let's be all apathetic. And if that doesn't work, distract myself with, there's a bird. You know, like, not that birds as an adult, they're probably, you know, it's more like
Where's my phone?
There's a woman bird. You know, like, it's more like that. But the trouble is, we distract ourselves with so many things because we're just afraid of some feelings, right? The reason why we're so afraid of feelings is because we've grown up in a society that's terrified of feelings. And it's evident everywhere in society because all you've got to see is a child crying and everyone's in a panic, or an adult crying, everyone's in a major meltdown and they want to give them pills, right? Because they want to stop the feelings. Because not only are we afraid of our own feelings, but we're afraid of anybody else having a feeling as well. Who knows what they might do if they have a feeling. And so we're afraid of, there's this general, and we talked about it in a group in, I think it was 2016, where we did some assistance groups, and they are on video on our website. But we talked about it as the general, all-pervasive, overriding feeling that most of society has now of terrified of emotion. Terrified of hard emotions like sad, shame, guilt. We're terrified of these difficult emotions. And as a result, and also, by the way, none of you have ever been taught how to feel them in a positive way. In fact, if anything, you've all been taught how to be unloving about them, right? You've never been taught how to lovingly go through a difficult feeling. Most of you have no confidence you can even do it. Like, you think it's going to be the end of the world, the end of your life, if you do it. The majority of you have no confidence at all in it. So here I am in this fearful state. I'm terrified of feeling my feelings, and underneath of these fears are all of the emotions. And by the way, they're not just emotions. Many of them have become so solid in us now that they are beliefs, things I believe, right? So just I before E except after C, beliefs. So the emotions, but also beliefs, they now become a part of what we believe is right, believe is good for us, believe is righteous. You know, and the problem is that all of these fears, which we don't want to feel about, are really covering all of these emotions that are in us, most of which boil down to a few basic feelings. The biggest one is sad. But let's not call it sad, because sad can often be a state rather than a process of a feeling. Let's call it grief. You know, gut-wrenching sad. Let's call it that. So oftentimes the biggest emotion we have almost about every situation is, in the end, grief, where you're grieving. There's a whole heap of grief that's built up in you over the years you've been alive. Some of you, that's been, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Even when you're a child, there's a build-up of grief by the time you're a teenager. So here we are, there's this grief, none of which we've been allowed to feel, and all of society, our mother and father, and ourselves, by ourselves, are terrified of it. So what do? What we think is a good thing to do is just to deny it all and shove it all down and use our fear as a tool to keep it under suppression. Because that's good. That's the role of fear. The role of fear is to stop you from taking actions, stop you from change, stop you from doing something positive with your life, including getting rid of the grief you feel. The role of fear is to tell you that you shouldn't have to. do it. That's the purpose of fear. The purpose of fear is to say you shouldn't have to be loving. That's the point of fear. So the point of fear is to go, I should not have to be loving. Right? I should not have to go through these difficult emotions. Don't you understand? These emotions are terrible. Don't you understand? Nobody should ever have to feel them. Nobody. Don't you understand that? So the point of your fear is to build up your terror of the emotion to the point where you don't want to feel it anymore. Now, the person who does that is taking the action to disconnect from their soul completely. Right? So you could say that these things above that line are all the actions we take to avoid everything below the line. Couldn't you?
Jay, what happens if you're just getting a ring as you're in that corner? What if we move across a bit?
Yep. Just move that chairs over a little too. Is everyone good with that so far? Yep. Any questions? Yep. So come down here.
Yeah, if you come.
So, if I understood right, you said, I think, that anytime we feel anger, it is because there is an addiction that is not met. What about, for example, as a child, when we were actually trying to express our true nature, our soul, and that was suppressed, and
Yep.
that created anger? Then
Yep.
would it be in that case, for example, that it was not an addiction, but it's actually our soul expression?
Well, if your soul as a child was in a state of love, would you ever revert to anger as an expression of something that's from your soul?
I mean, so the suppression, so if the parent didn't allow that.
So your anger is fear of the feeling of suppression as a child, but you don't know that as a child, obviously, but that's what it is.
And it's not to say, I'm powerful enough to still be myself and like establish myself.
Well, that's what the addiction will want, is for you to get angry and feel power, yes.
So if something very unloving
See,
like
what-
violence is done
Ask
to
your real
us.
question. You're really saying, but AJ, what about when a child is righteously angry?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And I'm saying there's no such thing.
So when processing emotions, in videos you have said that we first need to feel the anger that we have in our soul to get to the underlying grief, for example. So, for example, if someone is...
I'm not suggesting you don't need to feel it. I'm saying it's a construct. Feel it, for sure, but understand that it's a construct done because you're avoiding an addiction. Now, as a child, so let's say I'm a child, and I wanted to do what my soul wants. Now, if I get angry, then it means that I'm in an addiction wanting to do that. See, like when I was a child and I was restricted by my parents in some way or another, I never got angry about it, right? Because I knew if they went around, I could do it. So all I had to do is not be around them and I'd be fine. Does that make sense? Now, the average child, of course, doesn't have that cognizance, doesn't have that recognition, but so instead they try anger first, right? But it's still, why would I try an unloving act in order to be a loving person? the child doesn't know this because the child is not getting educated in that direction. So I understand the child's action. I'm not saying that child's action is not understandable in the circumstance, but it is unloving.
So is it that we need to feel the anger, release it, and then go deeper? Is it still a good thing to do?
Yeah, well, you know, the thing you need to understand about anger is this. You can feel the anger, but at the end of the day, the anger is there because you want power. So unless you can feel the anger, and eventually if you feel it properly, you will realise, all I want is power over my addictions. Not, you know, I want my addictions met. And that's why the anger is there. If you feel it, you will very quickly, like within usually half a minute, realise that's why it's there. If you're sincere about it, you will do that. But if you're not sincere about it, you'll stay angry for days.
Years.
Years. You know, imagine your husband cheats on you. You being angry about it is an addiction. So this is what it looks like in practice. You being angry about your husband cheating on you is an addiction. Why? Because you're trying to get power over the situation. You're trying to get power over what you feel. Right?
I think for me, I've had a lot of anger, and it's been very educational, if you like.
About your addictions.
About my addictions, about my demands. So having my anger, so I've had a lot of anger, I've expressed anger, I've experienced anger
And it helps you identify your addictions.
It's helped me understand exactly what Jesus is describing. I felt it in myself. Oh, I want God to change. You know, that's why I'm angry.
Yeah.
Bloody God, you change. I don't want to change here. Or I don't want to have to feel how unjust that was towards me. That's why I'm angry. But I didn't really understand that emotionally about my anger until I accepted that I was angry. And maybe acceptance of my anger was the biggest educational process, because then I could really feel it inside me and feel its motive, if you like. Like it's like the emotion had its own demand.
The addiction driving it.
Yeah, and it helped me understand my addictions a lot.
Yeah.
But it never, it didn't take away my addictions. It didn't take away my demands. That's still something.
Yeah, the purpose of it is to feed them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It just helped me feel that those things are there. But I'm still in areas doing work on those demands emotionally, like asking for God's education about that, asking for the morality about that in my prayer, softening to, well, okay, God, you're not changing what is the thing that has to change in me? What is my unloving demand? So, yeah.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense, Hannah?
Yeah.
It does, and I still have a question about the kid, like when they're done like really like something violent by the parents. There, I still don't understand why their anger would be. Well,
the child's having a violent response. Now, the child is uneducated in love, so I can understand its violent response. It hasn't been educated yet in love.
But most children, when violence is
violent.
perpetrated against them, their first instinct is not anger.
No.
Yeah, no.
Their first instinct generally is sadness, but
Or their first response is, usually they feel terrible
and then they're not allowed to
sadness.
feel their sadness, and then they get angry.
Yeah.
And again, they get angry because they're not allowed to feel their sadness, and so this whole thing is still exactly the same as if it was for an adult.
Right, okay, yeah, it's not, it's true.
But so if you have a childlike part of you that feels angry, yes, feel your anger. But I think, well, I know you're going to find the most power is it'll be informative in this process.
Yeah, it'll tell you
it'll
what your
educate you.
addictions are.
Yeah.
Okay, now I understood that there is this whole process that goes on before the child actually gets to anger.
Yes.
Is that
It's very true.
Okay.
You think the child has an experience, it's getting shut down some way or other. It has some grief about it, not allowed to have it. You know, we just said, didn't we, earlier, that grief is like the very worst thing most of us can feel, and particularly as a child, because the parent then feels, I'm a bad parent, my child's crying, not allowed to have, they try and shut down the child, give them a lolly, giving some food, breastfeed them if they're younger. Do whatever you can to stop the child from grieving, is the general feeling. Now, the child feels the intent from the parent to stop it from grieving. So what's its next port of call? It's now afraid. It's now getting fears associated with its grief. It's now like every time I feel like crying, my mum and dad get violent with me, emotionally violent with me, right? As a child, you're not thinking these things consciously, but you can feel it, right? And so they're going, now I'm terrified to feel grief. What do I do now? Now we're on the addiction path, and now we're on the anger path, and now we're on the numb out path eventually. So there's children who have been so badly treated that by the time they're 5 years of old, they're already numb. But there's also children who have been badly treated but not gone that far. By the time they're 5 years old, they're like raging lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
And, a lot of times there's a lack of love in a child's environment where they're treated badly or suppressed, but they're also often taught to have expectations that they shouldn't have to feel sad, you know? And that is that generates a lot of rage in kids, and as an adult, you still have to deal with that. The kid in you still has to unlearn that learn God's truth about that. Yeah.
In a way, I have sort of simplified this diagram a bit, so let's just add a little bit, because Mary mentioned it just now, and that is
Man, that's a big one.
when we start shutting down emotion, and particularly grief, and other emotions too, we have the expectation we can continue doing it. And that expectation then drives us manufacturing a whole list of addictions. And those addictions will be any addiction that works in the circumstance. So the addiction might be food, it might be drink, it might be activity, it might be sport, it might even be things that look like they're good, like, doing yoga every day. Yeah?
Living in my mind.
Sorry?
That my
Living in my mind.
That my mind will figure out everything, and I won't have to feel. Because I shouldn't have to feel discomfort. I shouldn't have to feel grief. In the West, most of us, even like feeling cold for half an hour, we're like, "Whoa, something is very wrong." I need to get shelter immediately. Like a lot of us, just physical discomfort, we have the expectation that we shouldn't have to feel. But there's, we shouldn't have to feel afraid. We shouldn't have to feel exposed. We shouldn't have to feel grief. There's a lot of expectations that most of us grow up with, and they're unique to our family. Usually there's a certain flavour to them. But giving up those expectations is a huge issue in your relationship with God, because without knowing it, we place those expectations on God, and we expect God to meet those expectations in our relationship.
Yeah, and even your partner.
Your partner, gosh, yeah. The whole world.
The whole world, really. We place
friends,
this expectation
children.
upon our friends. And so our best friends are usually those who meet our expectations the best.
Yeah.
So they're not really people we like very much, but they just meet our expectations the most to avoid our feelings the most. That's the unfortunate thing about most of our choices and decisions. They end up being this sort of weird... We end up in this weird illusory state of thinking we've got friends when really they're just people who support us in our comforts.
Yeah.
And they're not real friends. They're not the same passions and desires or anything like that. They just support us in our addictions. They don't mind our addictions, and they don't mind meeting them, because they might have a codependent addiction that we meet in them. Mm-hmm. So it all works. It all works. If you want it, many people who listen to Divine Truth, we find, who come to listen, many of them are driven by conspiracy theories, right? I'm not into conspiracy theories, but there is a conspiracy. Nobody wants to feel that. That's the world conspiracy. Nobody wants to feel,
Grief.
in particular grief, but any negative emotion at all. Nobody wants to feel them. And that is the biggest conspiracy we have on this planet, actually, and almost all of us are in agreement with it. Right? And from God's perspective, we're living this illusion. The illusion that we're actually living a life, while at the same time not having emotion. Right? Yeah.
Can I ask her? Yeah.
I'm just wondering about like so if I would be having my addiction not met, and I would get angry or maybe start cry because of the effect.
Well, yeah, a lot of times even when we're crying, we're actually crying because our addiction isn't met.
Right.
I'm not loved because my expectations aren't being met. Yeah.
You see this in children who weren't allowed to be angry when they were children.
Yeah.
They were allowed to cry but not be angry, right? So there's sometimes when you're a child and you were taught you weren't allowed to be, crying, then in those cases you were allowed to get angry and express your anger. And for many of us, even then, that was wrong. Got a belting for that as well. And so then you went into these other places of distraction, numb, and all those kind of places. Manipulation, all underhand, a lot of underhanded things we do. Like what would you call that? Sort of manipulative, deceitful things that we do. We're taught to be deceiving. We're taught to not be truthful with our feelings. We're taught, you don't tell mum and dad this and you don't tell mum and dad that. And if you want to go out with your boyfriend when you're 14 and have sex with him, just don't tell mum and dad about it. Do you know what I mean? Don't be honest. Now, of course, God expects you to be honest about everything you do, but you're in a situation where you've grown up in this thing where you want your addiction still, but you're not allowed to be honest about it, so you just don't tell them. Right? So you end up in this place up here where you're doing a whole heap of things which are actually damaging to your own soul. You're doing a whole heap of morally damaging things to your own soul in order to get the sensory response, that you want. And you're in this place because in the end you want the addiction, you want the power over all the feelings, and that's driven by these expectations that build over a lifetime. And start at our childhood and build up. And all of it, or the whole construct, is because the whole world's terrified of crying and not getting what they want.
And what's my next step, if I kind of get stuck in the addiction not being met and I'm crying for the effect, or I'm getting angry, What's
the antidote to fear? Truth. Got to be honest with yourself. Got to be sincere.
Pray for truth.
Pray for truth. Pray for more sincerity. Pray to see the truth. Right? Not the truth of how everybody else is being unloving.
How I am being unloving.
How I'm being unloving.
What's my addiction? What's my expectation?
Yeah, the truth.
And when I see that, that's when the real feeling would.
Well, then you're probably going to have some feelings about the reality of having to give that up. If then you have all these false beliefs about, well, if I don't have this, what have I got?
You'll find you'll have faith that is corrupt, that you have to feel your way through. You'll find that you believe in things that are false. You find that you believe in things that are unloving. You'll find all sorts of things. But truth is the way forward every time. But to accept truth, we must learn to be
humble.
Humble is feeling and experiencing all of those difficult emotions. So we have to learn how to be humble. A lot of truth can't come to you unless you're humble. Yep. So a lot of times what happens is people go, what about this and what about that? And why can't I resolve this? And I've had this problem for years and years and years, and what's going on? And the net reason for those things occurring is I have never been humble enough to resolve them. Yeah? That's the net cause. I've never been soft enough to my feelings and willing to go through them enough to recognise what they are and why I have them. Yep. When you go through your feelings, it's really interesting because you will notice a number of physiological effects as well of going through your feelings. So you will find that as you go through a feeling that's causal, you could call it, or the cause of your problems, you'll find your energy system in your body will probably heat up, you'll sweat, and you have all these confusing physiological symptoms as you go through the emotion. And that's indicating to you that you're actually getting down to something that's been locked up in you for years and years and years. That makes sense? That you actually go through it physically as well as emotionally. So I notice that a lot of people who claim they're processing things emotionally don't ever have that. So that would indicate they're not processing things emotionally. They're in the addiction of crying, hoping that their tears will somehow, people around them will see how sad they are about their addiction not getting met. And then somebody will come to their rescue and meet their addiction. It's a very common way of manipulating people to cry. So I'm not talking about that kind of crying. I'm talking about actual grief where you are in your stuff. And to be honest with you, it's very rare to do it in the company of others. Because you're going to want to be really self-absorbed in the emotion, to do it. So this is the place to get to. And this is what I find interesting, is that a lot of people call me, what's the word they say, where I'm a bit of a masochist, because I'm recommending that all of you feel your sadness. So they think that I'm a sadist of some kind, recommending to you that you're all going to have to be sad just like I am. Right? And the reason why they say things like that is because everyone is so terrified of just feeling some grief. Now, I'm not saying to you that some of your grief is not going to be really, really big, because some of it is. Like, you imagine if you've been a child who was violently abused most of your childhood, that you're going to have a fair bit of grief to feel, right? Now, if you've been a child who's been spoilt most of their childhood, you're also going to have a fair bit of grief to feel. Yeah. Because you're going to have the grief of none of your expectations in the future God ever meeting them. Yeah. So you're going to have
give
to
them up like prized possessions. Yeah.
You're going to think, I need them, but none of them are going to get met. So there are all sorts of circumstances in childhood that's going to trigger you into specific kinds of grief. Some of the grief is going to be my addiction's not getting met, that kind of grief, which is not real grief. And then there's other grief, which is like, this terrible thing happened and it was bad. Yeah. And you're going to have to go through that feeling of grief. But you can do it. God designed your soul to feel anything. Yeah? God designed your soul to feel anything. In my life in the first century, I was tortured on a number of occasions, close to death on 3, and our soul can handle it, right? On one occasion, I had spears through my shoulder, my hip, my back was broken, I was towed behind a horse through the city square naked, and this happened when I was 19 years of age in the first century, and I handled it. Right? It took me nearly 6 years to recover from it, right, where I could walk again, and I handled it. All right? The torture went on for 2 days, and I handled it. And you look at, I've got lots and lots of friends in the spirit world that have had just as bad or worse happen, and they handled it. And they handled it because the soul has the capacity to recover from any event. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone should perpetrate these events. I'm just saying the soul has the capacity to recover. You need to have some confidence in the way in which you've been created. Your soul is powerful. It's the most powerful creation that God has ever made. Your soul. It is the pinnacle of His creation. The pinnacle of it being made in his image. You can handle anything. You need to get some confidence that you can. And to be honest with you, your emotions are like, phew, compared to other things you might have to handle. But for most of us, the emotions are, ugh, like the worst thing to handle. Many of you would rather be tortured than have your emotions. Right?
We do all kinds
Many
of
of you
things.
would rather torture yourself
Yes.
than have your emotions. You'd rather have years and years of bad situation, bad life, bad experiences, rather than deal with one emotion. That's how afraid of our feelings we have become. And it's a major problem we face, particularly in Western society. But now it's becoming a problem, epidemic in the world, you know. Like I said, it is the real conspiracy theory. It's the real conspiracy. Yeah. Is it?
Why is it so prevalent?
How do you feel when you have to feel something? Something bad.
Resistive, like very...
Yeah. So, and you think about it, how many of us, like, not only, like if you feel that now, you have children, right? Yeah. You're going to try to get them to feel the same as you do. You don't want them to feel just like you don't want you to feel. And every generation has this thing of, I don't want the next generation to feel. And then not only that, now we've got like a population amount of all of us that don't want to feel. And then on top of that, in modern society, we have the ability to meet our addictions with more comfort, with more opportunity. You know, nowadays, it's very rare for a person in the West to experience half an hour of discomfort. You know, bit warm, turn on the aircon. You know, I'm a bit hungry, go and get something to eat. There's no waiting for, you know, the discomfort to build. It's like and many of us are now so sensitive to discomfort that just the minor amount of discomfort, and we're in a rage. Like, we're like beyond reasonable. You know, you see it when you're travelling in a plane a lot, right? So, yeah, it's like, what's this meal? What? You know, or, you know, there's all sorts of things that people do just because of minor discomforts. Yeah.
You were taking off continually.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll just bound myself a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the biggest issue is that it's like the whole world is in agreement. And when the whole world is in agreement with something, and you're growing up in a world that's in agreement with something, the imperative and the imposition upon you to agree with it is immense. You've got the souls, which are the most powerful thing God's ever created, all in agreement on an issue with regard to emotion. All of the souls on earth are almost in agreement on the same thing. And I'm saying to you, you've got to start disagreeing with them all. It's going to be tough, right? It is going to be tough. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because when you're the first person doing something and you're in complete disagreement and disharmony with the rest of the world about it, do you think it's going to be like a walk in the park, you know, a breeze? It's definitely not, right? But it's what you need to do if you want to ever have a real relationship with yourself, with the other half of yourself, with anybody you ever meet, and with God, is to become a real person who has feelings. Now, years ago when I started this process, I was 33, around about 32, 33, and I was numb to the hilt. Like, I couldn't, I was stoic, very rarely feeling, always just acting, always using my intellect, I was constantly, every night I would make a list of what I've got to do the next day and do that. There was no room for feelings. No room for feelings. And it's taken me now, from that time, I'm 20, what is it?
How old were you?
I'm 61, so.
21. You're 21.
27, I'm 21. 27 years to become the person who can feel as much as I do now. Right? Which not only means that I can feel my own feelings now, I can feel yours too. Every thought you have, I can hear them. I couldn't do that years ago. I can feel every single feeling you have towards me, every single feeling you have towards each other, every single feeling you actually carry with you that's out of harmony with love, as well as all the ones that are in harmony with love. And I can feel that for myself and others. But 27 years ago, like I said, I was numb. That's the benefit of following God's way. But I've had to learn to have some courage about going against everybody about it. You know, my family was so opposed to me feeling anything. My mother in particular was very opposed. They called it me having a breakdown.
They still call
They
it you
still call
having
it
a
that.
breakdown.
To this day.
Yeah. When you had your breakdown.
When you had your breakdown, I said, what breakdown was that? I had a breakthrough, you know, like into this. And they said, but you were crying a lot. I said, yeah. You know, I've now been crying for 27 years. Not every day, of course. But, you know, like last week, Mary and I were really attacked by spirits when we first came to Brussels. I hadn't slept for nearly 8 days. It was pretty bad, the attack. Well, every time I tried to drop off sleep, they'd wake me back up again. And just sort of like a torture in a different way. And eventually, on Saturday night, just last Saturday night, I got to some feelings about it, and for about 4 hours I cried. Worked through some feelings. I said to Mary, I'll be right the next day.
I knew. I knew.
Yeah.
As soon as you got to where you needed to get to, it'd go.
Yeah.
But it was pretty bad getting there.
Yep. So this time last week, we were looking at counselling this event because I was so bad. And when I say I was bad, I hadn't slept for 8 days, and I was sick as a dog. Bad. You know, I was getting attacked in my nervous system and my muscular system, and also I had a lot of grief to feel and so I had sinus problems and
coughing.
sinus, which I've still got a bit now, but it's slowly going. But I was coughing all the time, and I was bad. I couldn't sleep at all. I was about as sick as I'd been for like maybe 10 years. Maybe. I don't get sick very often, maybe once every 5 years or... Nowadays, you know, when I was a child, I got sick every week, or every month at least. But now I don't. The more I progress, the less I get sick. But it was bad. It was a bad situation, but I eventually connected to the emotions, and I could feel when I did the same response I have every time I feel, the physiological responses. Went through the emotion. And like I said to Mary, like I woke up the next morning. Well, I actually slept afterwards, and woke up next morning. Said I should be fine for next week. Yeah. Took me 2 more days to recover, but that's the power of doing it. It's like, and I've had that experience like thousands of times, so I've got a lot of confidence in it. So I don't take any medication, I don't take any pills or drugs or headache tablets or anything. I drink water, I eat mostly fruit and vegetables and nuts, and for the most part I don't experience unhappy things. You follow? But I used to a lot. But every time something bad does happen, where I'm being attacked, you know, when I talk about attack, most of the time when I'm attacked, there's millions of spirits involved in the attack. You know, they're so used, many of the spirits who attack me are so used to killing people with two spirits attacking them that they're totally confused and very angry about me not dying. And so they just like heap it on and organise constant regime replacement, you know, to continue the attack and so forth. And it can go on for days and days until I patch something up. Once I patch it up, it's all gone. Yep. Now, I've got confidence in that because I've learned to have confidence in God's way. I've learned to trust God, that the way God wants me to deal with things is not to take it out on Mary or take it out on other people. He wants me to deal with it. He wants me to work through my issues in a loving manner. He expects that if I wish to continue a relationship with him, right, that he expects me to live by the love I've received. That's what his expectation is. And to be honest with you, that's what I want to do. Not because he expects it, because it's fantastic, right? It alleviates so many burdens. But I'm not saying to you that going from a place of stoicism to a place of feeling is not going to be difficult, because I found it quite difficult. It took me probably the first year and a half before I actually felt an emotion, right? So it's not going to be necessarily easy because in this state of being mind dominant, which I was intensely in mind dominant, and in this state of just going by what your senses told you, in that state I was like shut down, stoic, resistive to all of my feelings, but at the same time trying to be kind. At the same time trying to be a loving person, and, you know, didn't work very well. But once I realised that this dominance that I had in my mind was my main problem, and by the way, God taught me that it was. Like, God showed me that it was the main problem I had. And once that happened, then I started making progress. And sometimes the progress was so rapid that problems that I thought were insurmountable 1 month later had been solved. You know? But it required trust in the grieving process, trust in my feelings, trust that I could bear it. Because there were a lot of bad feelings. At one point when I was in my early 30s, my entire family rejected me because I was in a religious faith that they, you know, that I wanted to leave, and they wanted me to stay, and then they decided the way to punish me for that was to never speak to me again. And so my entire family, so I'm talking about my children, my ex-wife at the time, my parents, all of the other parents around, and all of my friends, and most of my work colleagues all rejected me, to the point where I walked down the street and they would not speak to me or look at me. Right? And that happened at the same time as I was going through grief of my own situation. So, and it was also happened at the same time that I lost my job, and it also happened at the same time that I had nowhere to live. So I had to find a place to live. So there was an intense amount of grief. I cried during that period. I reckon I cried probably 8 hours a day for 4 months. Yeah. Every single day. I used to get up with the purpose of crying. And then I would cry in the morning. Generally, I would cry as soon as I get up. I would cry until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then I would have some relief. And I used to try to have my children, you know, at the time my children were in their early teens or just before, and I used to try to have my children 3 days a week, and I used to make sure that I could cry at least 6 hours a day before they arrived. So that I didn't have to visit my sadness on them. Right? It took years for me to do that. You can do it. You don't have to act unlovingly. You don't have to suicide. You don't have to, do anything damaging to yourself or others. You can actually go through your emotional experience. And the more I did, the closer to God I felt, and the closer to God I felt, the happier I become. The happier I become, the better my life became. Yeah. From that time, it took 12 years before I met Mary. 12 years. So I started when I was 33. When I was 45, I met Mary. Right? During those years, I also come to remember who I was. And then, of course, that introduced a whole new level of crying, a whole new level of grief. I started to remember my previous life experience in the 2,000 years of my life. And my loss of that is incredibly immense, like in terms of grief. My loss of that, the consciousness of the loss of it. And so I had all that to do as well, like solid. Before I met Mary, 5 years of that, before I could meet Mary. And then on top of that, I had to embrace my passions and desires, to teach people, to love them, to share truth with them and stuff like that. And I had to do all of that before I could even meet Mary. So that was a 12-year process to meet Mary. I wanted my soulmate when I was 33. Right? As soon as I saw her, there's my soulmate. Could see, there she was, there's my soulmate. I didn't say to Mary that she was, but as soon as I saw her, I knew, there she is. And the relief of that finally knowing was fantastic. But then I thought, well, I can't tell her. That wouldn't be very loving, so. Yeah. But a lot of people around me felt, you seemed all of a sudden very relieved. What's going on? And I said, well, I just met my soulmate. And then some of them spent a bit of time with me, and so they went back in their heads working it out. It's Mary. And they went and told her, and told her family. Yeah. But, and that's how Mary found out that I thought she was my soulmate, not by me telling her. So what I'm saying is that it took 12 years of emotional work, sincere emotional work, for me to get to the stage, and I was still having to work, still having to hold down a job for the majority of that time, still having to work, and I had properties to sell. I was a developer as well, and I had properties to sell. I owned a computer company during this entire time where I had to, service clients and everything else. So sometimes I would get up in the morning, cry for 2 hours, go to work, have a break at lunchtime, go home, have a break, 2 hours, cry, go back to work. That's what it took. Right? And I'm not saying it's going to take that for you.
Yeah, I think everyone now's freaking out.
Yeah, freaking out. Right? I'm saying that because I'm trying to tell you that you can handle it.
If you can handle that, if Jesus can handle what he had to handle, you guys
can handle that.
You can handle what you need to handle.
Yeah. It's not. You got to, though, have some deep confidence and trust and faith in God's nature and goodness that he will bring you through it. Yeah? He will help you do it. And not only that happiness is the end result. Mm. Like, I'm happier now than I can ever remember being my entire of this life. Right? But I had to get rid of a lot of sadness to be happy. Mm. Yeah.
And a lot of you were parents and also have a feeling of concern for the world and where the world is going. And really, this is the quickest way to remove the damaging effects that each of us is having on our children, on the people around us, on our environment. Yeah. You can do it the natural love way, but it's going to take you a long, long time, and you're going to be in the spirit world before you get through it. And then there will be damage that you have done on earth. And
there'll be no good effect on earth either.
Yeah. We have the potential to make a really positive change
in your lifetime while you're here.
Yeah. To actually leave the world in a place that's better because of your input, Yeah.
So else?
Why wouldn't it be loving to tell Mary that she was your soulmate?
I'll leave that question for tomorrow, I think.
Why wasn't it, Elf?
But it wouldn't be, and something for you to wonder
about tonight, and see if you know the answer in the morning.
Yeah, so it's very important, we're near the time we need to finish now, so it's very important for us to start to grasp the importance of the soul and how the emotions are the key to you opening up your soul. Because what I've also found is all of the other soul attributes, so my ability to hear you telepathically, for example, my ability to feel your feelings, they all came from opening up my soul. They're all things that came as a result of going through this clearing work and working through my soul problems.
Because you could really say, you've talked a lot about the law-based restrictions, haven't you?
Yep.
You now have law-based rewards.
Rewards. Mm. So, see, if you're in a state where you are worried about everything, you really don't want to hear everybody else's worries. Do you understand? So that's one reason why there's a restriction of the law for you to feel other people's feelings. If you're not capable of coping with your own worries, how are you ever going to handle other people's? Projected at you all the time. If you can't handle your own grief, how are you ever going to cope with other people's grief around you. You're going to be trying to shut them down all the time, right? So what I also realised through this process was the more I dealt with my own stuff, the greater capacity I had to feel everybody else. And it didn't hurt to feel them. Yeah. It felt good to feel them. It's like, I only have to spend a few moments in your company. I already know you. You think I don't, but I do. But I also often know you better than you know yourself. Now, many people in Australia who have spent a longer time with me know that, because I've had that experience on a personal level over and over again, where they thought they felt one thing and they thought they felt another thing, and we talk about something and then they realise, oh, what I'm saying was true. I can even tell them their history. There are things like, what happened to them as a child, why they feel, how bad they feel, why they feel that, right? None of those capacities were with me when I was 33. None of them, right? So what I'm trying to say here is there are rewards for doing this. God's not, you got to do all this hard work and at the end of it you get nothing anyway. That kind of thing. It's not like that, God wants to give you gifts, and some of those gifts are these incredible, like spiritual gifts, like understanding yourself, understanding your own motivations, and being really self-aware. Also, understanding other people, understanding their motivations, and being really aware what drives them. And they don't even have to tell you. You can feel from them what the problems are, and and if you're confused about it, you can ask God and he can tell you some extra bits about it, and then you're not confused. There are so many gifts that come from this process of, you could call it breaking down, opening up your heart. It's breaking down the restrictions to your heart. And if you can think of your soul as your heart, the feelings that you have, and really what you're trying to do is open it up and soften it up. And that's why I love that verse in the Bible. There's a verse in the Bible that says that God is going to turn your heart of stone into a heart of flesh. Yep. And the way God does that is by gifting you love to the point where your stony heart can receive some and start softening. And what will happen is that as your stony heart starts to become a heart of flesh, you'll realise, I've got all these feelings that have been stored up with me for years and years and years, and they're going to have to come out. So it's also a bit like this. Imagine you had a pet, like a dog or something, and it was thrown into a cactus bush, right? And all over its skin, it just had cactus prickles, all over it. You imagine, every time it moved, it would be painful, wouldn't it? Every time it did something. To a large degree, this is what we become. We've been put in this unloving situation, which is like prickles, like cactus spikes, and they're now in us. They've got to come out, right? And what we try to do instead is we try to wrap it all up and bandage it all up and but leave it there. And we think that's the solution. But all that's going to happen then is it just festers more and more and more and get worse. So what God wants to do is God wants to pull them all out. They are your emotional injuries. And God wants to pull them out. He wants to help you pull them out. He's going to help you identify them, help you see where they are, help you grab them, help you pull them out. He's going to do all of that. But you need to be willing. Yeah? Willing. And this is our problem, is that the majority of us are not willing. We're not willing. We go, what? You expect us to go through all that pain again? But the real problem is we never went through it properly the first time. Understand? It's like we were never allowed to. That's the real problem. And if you can allow yourself to go through it, go through the experience, everything will work out. And that's one of the things we'd like to reassure you of. Yeah? It's going to require your courage, your perseverance, and your desire to feel. You've got helpers, you've got spirits who want to help you, you've got people on earth who want to help you, you've got knowledge now. You can work with the knowledge you receive about the soul, you can work with that. On the websites, we've got like thousands of videos. A lot of them are about how to process through things emotionally, how to work through all of that. The emotional opening must occur if you want a relationship with God. But also, if you even want a relationship with yourself, and even if you want a relationship with your other half, or even if you just want a relationship with your children or friends, at some point your heart has to be softer. Anyway, so let's do that. Yeah? Let's do that. Now, some of you will go, it's too hard, and some of you will go, what is he talking about? He's masochistic sadist telling me to feel my feelings. Now, that's okay. When you hit the spirit world, you're going to be asked to do it. At some point, you're going to have to do it, because without it, progress is not really possible. And if you ever want to experience the bliss of the celestial realms of the spirit world, it's going to have to be done. The sin has to go. It's a creation of humanity. Humanity is responsible for getting it gone. There's not going to be any Messiah come along and save you from it. God's not going to save you from it. He only corrects his own creations. Of course, he never makes any mistakes, so he's never had to correct his own creations. And he expects you to take responsibility for yours. Make sense? So No one's going to save you from it. There's no Messiah coming in the future who's going to save the world from anything other than educating you about your own emotions. Yeah? Yeah. All right, well, thanks for your time today. Now, hopefully tomorrow we'll have the opportunity to just talk a bit more about things like that in a less formal way and answer some of your questions. But we really want to stay on topic a bit with that subject as well, and particularly focus on, right, why are the emotions necessary in order to have that connection with God? And I think at the moment it's becoming quite obvious why, isn't it? Because God's communicating soul to soul. He's communicating with his emotions to your emotions. So you need to be able to give and receive emotions quite easily. You need to be able to feel this process quite strongly. And so it's pretty obvious as to why we need to do that if we want a relationship with God. And also, we might get the chance, we're just going to talk to some of our spirit friends a bit tonight and maybe get the chance tomorrow to talk to some spirits as well about the issues. And particularly maybe we're thinking about what they had to go through to get to the stage where they wanted or desired or could start to feel God's love flowing. Does that make sense to you? So that you don't feel like... I think it's important. See, most people on earth sort of think, oh, but in the spirit world it's going to be easier. And when we talk to them, you might see that actually it's not that easy either way. Right?
Well, it's the same process.
It's the same process.
Yeah.
It's the same process. It requires the same opening, the same unnumbing, the same respect of the moral laws. It requires the same. It's going to require the same of you as it has of them. So if we can hear some of their experiences, which is what we're thinking, then it might give you the opportunity also to ask them some questions about what they went through. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that you can see that it's not just something you're going to have to do here on earth, but also something that every single person who wants a relationship with God will eventually have to face. Yep. Good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.